Okay, we're down here to pretty much close to the end. Let me ask everybody in the back there, why don't you move on up? We have lots of space up here and you can see the slides. You all look like students back there, and that's usual what students do is sit at the back of the room. So move on up here and fill in. Yeah, that's not a requirement, it's a request. Let me also, as prefatory remark here, we are now officially under a tornado watch. The storms are approaching. If during the talk we hear the sirens go off, that means grab your things and head to the basement. The sirens are an indication that storm spotters have noted damaging winds in the vicinity. And we are in a room with windows. It's not safe to be here if that, in fact, is what happens. Which would be a dramatic way to end this year's symposium. Yes, yes. So also, if the sirens don't go off after the talk, everyone can join it, you know, restaurant, bar, whatever. So as a sort of a tradition here for the symposium, we have a closing keynote, someone who can present a recap of some of what goes on at the symposium, as well as we're going to get some remarks about summary of some things in the field. Our speaker is exceptionally well qualified for this. Michael Clothier, besides, he was introduced yesterday, besides being the Chief Information Security Officer for Northrop Grumman's, it's not aerospace, it's
Aeronautics.
The Aeronautics Division, which, if you know anything about Northrop Grumman, includes a lot of different kinds of things. But he has a personal history working in cybersecurity on at least 3 continents, and a variety of different roles that he will mention. Some of them, a little is in his biography that's online. But he's going to present to us a view that, you know, we've talked about IT, OT, IoT, but it's really just about the T. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and when he's done, we'll take questions, assuming that the winds don't pick up, and then I'll be back to close us out. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Speth. Appreciate that. Thank you, Joel. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here and speak with you today, this afternoon. Our Corporate Vice President and CISO of Northrop Grumman, Dr. Phyllis Nick, she was invited. She was unable to attend. I'm here on her behalf, and I do think it's an honor to be able to come and speak with you. So I've really enjoyed being here the last 2 days. I've never been to Purdue before. You can probably tell from my accent. I'm not originally from America, so to come and see some of the finest institutions, arguably in the world, has been quite remarkable for me. I watched some of the previous keynotes from other years, and there was remarks made about how, I would say, outstanding the poster competition was. So I attended that last night, and I think that's probably understating how, I think, remarkable it is. I see some of the students in the room that are here from last night, and thank you for moving forward. I appreciate that too. It was really incredible to see the I don't know, the intelligence, the competence, the passion, the attitude, enthusiasm. I mean, so many great qualities, and all of the people that were presenting about their research, their posters. It was just yeah, really heartwarming, and I feel a great sense of safety, if you will, in the future of the industry, be it cybersecurity, computer science, technology, as we're going to talk about a bit today. That is what the future generation, the future leaders of our country and of our world will look like. So it was really phenomenal. I was blown away and really impressed. So I really enjoyed that, as well as listening to a lot of the other speakers and things here today. So I just wanted to make that note before I get started here today. I also have a lot of pictures. So this is not going to be a normal, maybe keynote or normal presentation that you might be used to. I mean, I'm the last act of the day, so to speak, and I'm between you and whatever's next. So I'll try and make this engaging, lighthearted, and a little bit different. So there's no math equations. I don't think I hardly have any text even. So it's just going to be pictures. They all have a purpose. There's some stories. I'm going to take you through my professional career and in part what I would say maybe some wisdom or advice or guidance. One of the things that has happened over the last couple of days too, many of the students have come and asked me various questions, and they've all been fundamentally career related, or how things work in the corporate world, or what they can be doing or thinking about, moving forward out of their studies and entering that world. So I kind of have changed this a little bit in the last couple of days as a result of that, to kind of be a little bit more focused on the students. So this presentation is really geared more for all the students. So I want you to look at what I'm going to share with you as far as how my journey has gone, and then also what I'm going to share in relation to those pieces, because I think there's something that you can take away that's really important in your journey. So you're going to have a very different journey, and I just want to be able to pass on some insights, I think, of how I've got to this position over the years, so you can understand that. I think that's all I have. So I mean, even Phyllis mentioned, she knows my background quite well. She said that talking about your background, she thought would be particularly interesting and relevant. So there's also that dimension. So I'll get started. Here is me in the mid-90s in Auckland, New Zealand. That's where I grew up. I went to the high school there. They had a program where you could do some work experience at various industries, various companies around the school. So when I was 15, I went to a computer shop, worked there, or a computer actually company. There was a lot more going on than just fixing computers. I was there for 3 days. I enjoyed it so much that I said to the owner, can I come back during the school holidays? They said, sure. So I put on my tie. I think that's me on the left when I'm a little bit younger. I went along every day through the entire school holidays. When the school holidays finished, I said to the boss, can I come back? He said, sure. So after school every day, I just kept going there. One day he pulled me into his office and he said, we've got a bit of a problem. He said, I can't have you working here for free. And I said, okay, I'm very sorry, I won't come anymore. He laughed because he said, that's not what I mean. I'm going to start paying you. So when I was 15 years old, I was starting to be in paid employment in IT, and they had me fixing all kinds of computers and things like that. Well, fast forward a little bit. I mean, that's a picture of my bedroom at one point in the bottom. I think I'd been to some festival on the weekend, as you do when you're a teenager, and hence the colored hair, which I'm shortly thereafter had to put back to some more professional appearance. But I spent some years there just learning. I didn't have a normal career or a normal, finishing high school and then going into university. I knew that wasn't really the path for me. I knew I wouldn't be successful if I tried to do that. So for me, the best route or best option for me was just to get into the workforce, particularly that I had this opportunity, and that's how that started to work out. Infamous 1990s LAN parties. I was the network engineer, if you will, put these things together, help people fix PCs. So hobby, but a big thing back in the 90s. An opportunity came up in 1998 for me to actually move to Wellington, New Zealand. That's the capital of New Zealand. There were 3 engineers that left in fairly short succession out of the company from Wellington, so they had a need for some engineers to go down there. They offered it to, I would argue, to say more qualified people in the company in Auckland, but none of them wanted to go. So they went down the list effectively, and I was offered the opportunity and I moved. So I spent a year living in Wellington. And the key takeaway for that story, and this has been a constant throughout my career, and I think applicable for you too, is opportunities will come in many forms, and some of them may involve, physical relocations. And so it's important to think about that when you're entering the workforce, that you may have a preference, or there may be certain requirements why you need to live in a certain place and things like that. But if you are open and flexible to relocating or moving or different ways of working, then I think that will open more opportunities, and it may enable you to get into positions you otherwise wouldn't, or to accelerate faster. And there's going to be a recurring theme on that, and I'm going to share that as well as I go through this. Hence, Steph's comments about multiple countries, multiple continents. I have been to over 50 countries, predominantly with my work. I've lived in 4 countries, 3 continents, etc. So quite extensive, the work that I've done. After being in Wellington, one of the customers that we actually had, I built a good relationship with. He was a network engineer. He went over to Sydney, and he was working at the IBM at the Olympics. At the end of 1999, he called me and he said, do you want to come over and be a network engineer? And I said, well, I don't really think I know a lot about network engineers to the extent, network engineering, that the extent that I think you need to know about it. And he said, don't worry about it. He said, you're a smart guy, you'll figure it out. And not only that, half the guys they're hiring, they don't even know what they're doing either. So he said that you get paid more than if you're going to be a server admin or a system engineer. So I said, sign me up. So moved to Australia, moved to Sydney in 2000 and worked at the Olympics for a year. So just some pictures of the Sydney Superdome is where they had all the gymnastics and they had the basketball finals. So the American Dream Team was there. I remember watching that in the finals. So just what kind of the infrastructure, server room looked like, etc. This is me in a data center, also a recurring theme. Picture in the middle is just, I think that was the American Dream Team there playing in the basketball finals, and then the team I was working with. Some of the interesting thing was we were assigning volunteers to come and work. The volunteers were all college students, and some of them were older than me. I was 21. Some of the volunteers were 22 or 23 at college. So interesting dynamic, but nonetheless, great opportunity. So the key piece from that is the importance of relationships, because I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I hadn't been able to build a relationship with the person that I work for as a customer while I was at my previous job, Data Group. I traveled around the country, installed systems, servers, fixed things, etc. Built a great relationship, had a good rapport, so much so that we kept in contact, and then I was able to move into this opportunity. So key things, being able to move and that networking. And while you're in class now, school, etc., you want to be building relationships with the people that you're with. Maybe you already know this, but some people I don't. I think it's really important because one day you're going to be working together. Some of you may be bosses, some of you may be working for each other, etc. You're going to have opportunities to move into different companies, maybe globally, internationally as well. So the importance of networking and maintaining relationships, at least in a professional context. I think in general, but in a professional context, at least, is can't be understated. Very important. After that job, if you will, I've only ever applied for 2 jobs in my life. In an actual sense of applying for a job that I didn't know somebody. I've worked at a lot of companies and done a lot of things and had a lot of jobs, a lot of roles. I don't even know how many, I haven't counted. But I actually had to apply for this one at Macquarie Bank. And the interesting thing was I didn't even want the job. I applied for something else. Recruiter said, hey, why don't you apply for this job at Macquarie Bank? Macquarie Bank, wonderful bank, very well, very prestigious, very wonderful place to work at if you're familiar with that. I went along to the interview. I wasn't really that interested. I didn't mean to be too much of a jackass and things, but when I was asked various questions, I was a little bit of a smart ass. One was like, if I called your previous boss up, what would he say about you? And I just made comments that he'd say, well, it was a lot of fun. I like to enjoy myself. I'd get things done, but it was really important. So I didn't really realize probably that half of maybe the responses was probably exactly what he was after. They sent me for some aptitude test. They asked for my salary expectation, and because I didn't really want the job, I gave them a figure that I thought was pretty astronomical, and there's no way they're going to pay it. After they got my test results back, he had to match the patterns and do some maths and stuff, so I was quite good at some of those things. He phoned me up, offered me the job, and said, come on Monday. So I started working at a place that I didn't really think I would be working at or want to work at. So it's amazing how that works out. What I learned from this was that this is not the kind of place that I thrive in and I do well. And by that, I mean I had the same desk, the same job, and I didn't get to go anywhere. I didn't get to do anything. And when I've been in my previous jobs, we were building a venue, a Sydney Superdome. We were constructing a venue. My previous role was always about going out into the field, interacting with people, customer service, dealing with people, and all the rest of it. So fantastic. This was just the same desk, the same job, and I didn't enjoy that. So I knew that wasn't the place for me. My boss at the Olympics in the Superdome, he knew somebody that had a company, etc., that I was able to work at that did exactly the kind of work that I wanted to do. So I went in and worked for them. More pictures, more data centers, more servers, working in that kind of environment. Fast forward a bit here. This is kind of 2007. So the second largest company in Australia, I had a long relationship with until I actually came to just before the US. Infoplex was a startup effectively within Leighton. So Leighton was the second largest company in Australia at the time, $22 billion business. They were using an application called Insight, I-N-C-I-T-E. It was housed at Alpha West Optus. And it was a critical application because it was a project management system that they had to use for all their projects. Leighton, at the time, now it's called CIMIC. They were massive in civil, construction, mining, some oil and gas, those types of activities. So for this system to go down was caused significant problems. So they actually bought the application and they decided that they wanted to start up a company to host this. So I was brought on board and I wasn't really a data center building expert, but they said, we need to build a data center and we need to get it running in 6 weeks. So I learned a lot about, I think, right, electrical engineering. I learned all about three-phase power, amps, watts, voltage, power factor correction, inductive loads, resistive loads, all kinds of things. I became a somewhat power expert overnight and a lot of fascinating opportunities with that. So this was right in my element and I think just a fantastic opportunity. One other aspect of this too was there was a need to stand up an instance of Insight in Hong Kong. We had to do it in 3 days. So on a Thursday, I went out to the data center, got 2 pallet loads of servers and things and equipment, put it on an airplane. I mean, there's the famous, triangle, time, quality, and cost. So you can only ever have 2 of those at a maximum. And the time frame was extremely short, and the quality was metric, if you will. The scope was this had to be running in 3 days, so it was going to cost a lot of money. So it was more than $20,000 for the equipment to get air freighted over. All of our tickets, the company policy was international business class, booked same day for us to go, so some astronomical figure. But long story short, we had this thing built in 3 days. So we had to, everything that's involved with standing up a facility, internet connections, all the public domain registration, power, all the rest of it. But we had this thing built and running in 3 days. So I think fantastic accomplishment. But, that's also been willing to go somewhere at short notice. I think I had plans for the weekend, might have been my birthday, but ended up in Hong Kong in the data center installing things and putting it all together. So, quite amazing. I was in Mumbai, India in the end of November 2008. So I think the 26th of November through the 28th was the Mumbai attacks. I'd arrived the day before. I was over there fixing somebody's server because there's also a recurring theme that people don't take proper backups. They never actually test the restores. So when their servers die, they need somebody to recover it. Well, they had the vendor come in. Vendor said it was unrecoverable. So I also built a reputation and a track record for being the guy that could basically fix the unfixable. So I was flown over there short notice to fix this system and recover their data. While I was there, these attacks happened, and one of the hotels, the Oberoi, was just 2 miles down the road from where I was staying. So at that point, I wasn't sure whether there was going to be any events or situations taking place, at the hotel I was at. But you never know what's going to happen when you travel for work. I mean, obviously international has a whole nother different dimension, but you can be in different, certain situations that, you're just not going to expect. So, yeah. Another one, Hovd, Mongolia, probably a place you never heard of. I never heard of it. Same scenario. They had a single server on site that did everything. It had all the data of all of their production, and their production was coal. So there was a coal mine in northwestern Mongolia, near the Kazakhstan, China, and Russian border. The server died. The vendor said that their data was uncoverable. So like I said before, sent to the rescue. The only way to get a Mongolian visa the same day was to get that from the consulate in Canberra. So Canberra is the capital of Australia and ACT, Australian Capital Territory. It's about a 3.5-hour drive from Sydney. So I drove down to Canberra. You need to prove that you live in the Canberra. So I went past the bank, updated my records to some street address I found on Google, had to print a statement, went to the consulate with a letter, and then, magic worked. I just had to remember to change my bank address back afterwards so that things didn't get to the right house, to the wrong house. But, it's kind of some of the things you have to do to make this work. So flew out there. That was quite an experience. The GERS, I think, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, it was minus 45 or 48, minus 48 when I was out there. You had little pop alleys in the GERS, and you had to shovel coal in throughout the night to keep yourself from freezing. That's how that works out there. So that was a pretty interesting place. Yeah, I'll go on to the next slide. What I didn't realize was the significance of seeing a 2-hump camel on my travels. It was a flight from Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, out west, to the Hovd regional airport. I use that term loosely. It was a little concrete shack, basic little concrete building. Had a 4-hour forward drive journey out to this extremely remote mine site. On the way, saw a 2-hump camel, and when I got back and I told somebody, they said, "Oh, you realize that they only exist in a very small remote part of the Gobi Desert. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it's a very unusual thing that you're going to see out there. So, you know, quite amazing. In 2011, the relationships that I built through basically going around Asia and solving all their problems was such that they hired me over there to be their infrastructure director effectively in the Leighton Asia. So Hong Kong was the head office for all the international operation. They were a $3.2 billion business back in 2011. They had 16,000 people across 14 countries. And so that was the footprint or the landscape that I was supporting. So my duties were varied as per usual, on the tools, fixing something that's broken, you know, in my office doing things, and then out visiting sites. So in Hong Kong, we had 14 construction sites. I've always made it an effort to get out from my desk and be on site all the time. So even now, I travel 2 or 3 weeks of the month. I'm always out at Northrop Grumman at various sites, meeting with the business, you know, working on our, you know, in the sense of being on our production lines, working with the people out there too. So very active in the business, and that's the only kind of way that I thrive. I had that experience at Macquarie Bank, and I know what I don't like, so I really enjoy to get out there. This was fascinating because it was the CIO that brought me over there. He had an ulterior motive. After 6 months, he left and actually took another job. And his plan was to have somebody in place that could basically take over, if you will. The CFO at the time was who the CIO reported to, actually also changed over. And I kind of knew the CFO from my time back in Australia. So he said to me, I was 33, I think, at this time. He said, I'm not going to appoint you as the CIO because he said, I don't think you're ready for it. And I think that was a smart move because I don't think I was ready for that position at that point either. But he said, I'm also not going to put anybody else into that position. So he said, you can assume the acting role and we'll see how that works out. So that was a massive opportunity, shall we say. I was pretty honest. I said to him, there's some things I'm really good at and there's some things I'm not so good at, you know, and he just kind of laughed a little bit and said, don't worry about it. That's how we learn, we'll figure it out. Patted me on my back and sent me on the way. So a lot of great lessons from that. You know, I was in the office usually on the weekends. One Saturday he was there, I was there. He asked me what I was doing and I said, I'm just trying to catch up on work. And that was really started to teach me some skills. And I think these are important for you too. You know, the art of delegation, he said, you have to delegate, 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 delegate. And when you don't think you can delegate any further, go through your list and delegate some more. So I kind of struggled with that a little bit because I was used to being the guy that was out there fixing everything. And I wanted, you know, so, you know, everything else that goes with that. So I struggle with that. So if you move later on in your career into being more of a team lead, a manager, director, you know, whatever role, there's many people that I see now, they struggle with letting go of things and effective delegation. So that's a really important skill. And I see a lot of people, they get stuck there. I was stuck there. But I had a great mentor, if you will, or somebody that was prepared to invest in me and help me kind of through that. So to this day, I think I manage that very effectively. I have a lot of responsibilities, but I feel I'm able to appropriately delegate. My concern with delegating was, well, if I delegate things, you know, then some things are going to get screwed up. And he said, yeah. He said he expects that maybe 5–10% of things that he delegates are going to be a problem. But he said that means 90–95% of what I've delegated got done. And he said it's not a too big an effort to have to deal with that 5 or 10%. He said otherwise I'm going to get 20% of the things done, right? As opposed to 90–95 and a few things. So he said delegate everything and just understand there'll be some problems and you're going to have to fix it up. So I think that's a very important lesson. The Wynn Casino. I had one in Las Vegas. Well, Leighton had the contract to build the one in Macau. So that was a big program for us. That was a very expensive resort, shall we say, facility, and one of my most active projects for a few years while I was over in Macau. So yeah, great opportunity there on that piece. Another data center in the country, another year. So just a recurring theme. I've been very active in standing up different facilities around the world, working a lot with infrastructure. So just a very, I guess, diverse career on that front. And once again, that willingness and ability to travel and be open to different opportunities as they arise, I think will serve you well in your careers. Once again, Malaysia, you know, took the power out on the airplane, actually. Yeah, more construction sites. So Leighton had, I think, about 64 different sites around the 14 countries, and I think I visited nearly all of them. You know, there were places in Indonesia, remote parts of the jungle out there, the back end of, you know, the Philippines, all kinds of places. So it's really amazing what happens. And I digress a little here, and some of this is into the technology piece, and this is important later on for what it is that I have done and do at Northrop Grumman. You know, I didn't really discriminate against any of the technology in the sense that it was all effectively standalone and isolated, and the program or the project directors were kind of the kings. They were the ones that had to run their programs. And what they would typically do is they would get all of their IT at the end of a project, put it into a shipping container, they'd get the next contract, they'd go to the next contract, they'd open up the doors of the container, you know, wheel out the computers, and that was how they used to do IT. Well, that was obviously a big problem because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of things, you know, wrong with that piece. When the new CFO came over to Hong Kong, the challenge to me was across the Asian business there, they had, I think, like at least 14 different Active Directory domains, 5 mail systems. All their phone calls were just analog, you know, voice calls. They were spending more than $200,000 a month on international phone calls because they had all their PABXs just calling each other internationally. He'd come from a world in Australia where it was a lot more advanced technology-wise where he was working at. They had Link at the time, which is now like Teams, right? They had Skype for Business, but previously to all of that, it was called Link, where, you know, you could see someone's presence or status. You could see if they were green or they were red or something like that. So when he came on board, he said to me, I'm like in the dark ages of technology. I feel like I have to just pick up a telephone and call another, you know, executive, right, in another country to try and find out if they're there. He said to me, how long is it going to take until we can fix all this so I can actually have my link and see people and have a voice call and have video conferencing? And I told him, we're a long way from that. I've said, if you want to go on that journey, I've said, this is going to be many tens of millions of dollars, and this is going to take a long time. And he said, well, we don't have a long time. So this comes back to this kind of time, quality, cost kind of dimension again too, right? And so I said, well, I can kind of scope this out, but this is going to be pretty expensive. This was in the tens of millions of dollars. And I should note too that at this point, I'd realized I needed to be progressing in my formal education as well. So I actually started an MBA online, and I was studying the subjects at nighttime that were applicable to my acting CIO role. So there were some managing information systems courses. I was taking project management courses. I was taking all the courses that I needed to actually be applying. So it was fantastic. I was like actively implementing and living my first education courses. And so I kind of have a hybrid of working, studying, and merging the two. And not only did I have to actually run the operations of this company, I was actually responsible for the whole program of works to, you know, stand up a massive, you know, multinational team. I had 28 contractors at one point on this program, a program manager, 6 project managers, and we spent a lot of money on a lot of equipment. But we basically, while I was there for the 4 years, we transformed the entire landscape. You know, arguably you could say it was a cybersecurity project in a way, because they had so many internet connections and Wi-Fi access points, and they had basically had no protections on most of their systems. So a huge part of it was also some rigor and structure and disciplines around, you know, the cybersecurity piece. So they weren't obviously patching systems. They didn't have a lot of maturity and things. So a lot of work done around putting things into the data centers, single Active Directory, single mail system, reducing the number of internet access points and vulnerabilities of things, and also identifying critical systems. I was talking with SPAF the other night, and even about some of the threat vectors or angles. You know, what identified was that they had a system called CATS, C-A-T-S. It was a computer-aided tendering system. That system was the most important system at the point in time that a tender or a bid was due. So the bids were usually due on a midnight or whatever the day was. You know, that system running and operating and things was obviously critical up to that point, because for some reason they were always there, 11:59, you know, pumping out the final tender, clicking submit. So if that system was in some way unavailable, right, which is kind of some of the tenets of cybersecurity, or if it had been, the integrity was otherwise infected, that would be a big problem. So I realized that we need to do some safeguarding of things. So we had some appropriate segmentation, but there's also, you know, sometimes you think about threats maybe in a cyber world only from some foreign state adversary and they're overseas and things like that. But threats can exist in all forms. I know I'm kind of digressing a little piece into the technology piece, but that's kind of a blend, and I'll get more into the technology piece as we move on to the latter stages of this with specifically on the Northrop Grumman. But the, you know, an insider threat is a huge risk. and arguably some of the biggest threats, because they've already kind of mitigated maybe some of your lines of defense or some of the barriers that you put up. And your insider threats can actually be your competitors. A competitor would do anything to understand what your final bid was and your price, because the margins that these companies typically have is maybe 1 to 3% on a construction project. So very, very small. And if your competitors know exactly what your price was, they might be able to undercut you. And usually the cheapest price kind of wins, right? I know there's other factors, but that's generally how it works. But just a side note on that. So just bear in mind, risks do take different forms. They don't always have to be, maybe the typical ones that we think of. But insider threat and competitors are certainly part of those, part of the threat landscape. After that piece, unfortunately, the company decided to, outsource IT. So I didn't have a next place to go after that program. So I actually started applying for my green card to come to the US. That's a whole story in itself, but that process took me a couple of years to obtain a green card. While I was waiting, I thought, oh, I should probably find something to do work-wise. So there was a company called RCR Tomlinson. Through relationships and maintaining things, the CIO that I'd worked for in Hong Kong and previously, he knew the executive general manager of business services at RCR Tomlinson. He had a problem. He needed a consultant to come in and tell him why his $1.2 billion business was spending $30 million a year on IT. And IT was like bad. Everybody, the whole business was complaining about it. It was poor. He knew he was spending more than he should. And there was just so many problems. So he said, can you come in and help me understand what's wrong with this? So for me, this was somewhat easy relative to what I've been up to in Hong Kong. This kind of almost seemed like a kindergarten project because it was just infinitely more smaller on every scale. And I wasn't having to focus on all the operational based aspects. I could deal with this as solely, as a consultant, as a contractor working on the go forward and how do you fix position. So I was out in Perth, which was kind of the head office for a lot of this business. I was interviewing some of the IT leadership. One of them even said to me, he said, I think you'll be around for a while. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you're the fourth consultant that's come in. And he said, none of them are asking the right questions except for you. You're asking all the right questions. So I said, okay. So I was there for 3 months. So after 3 months, and I can refer back to some of my MBA thing for this, managing information systems, was all about people, process, and technology. So all of it was a mess. They basically had no process. Their technology was a disaster too. They'd kind of bought companies, but they never actually completed the integration from an IT perspective. So they still had all these separate domains, separate exchange systems, and they'd really struggled to integrate it. When I asked for like project plans, who's your project manager, all the rest of it, they didn't have any of that. So they were just trying to do these projects, very loosely, right, loose terms, with all of the same people that were doing all the operational work, and they were making no progress. And they were just throwing money at things. They had a 1.6 petabyte SAN, which in 2015 was pretty crazy because they didn't even have that many users. And anyway, just some very poor, I think, technology choices. And so my recommendation is really back to the executive general manager of business services was, you've got a lot of the wrong people. We need to get some process in here and we need to fix the technology. And he said, great, when can you start? And I was like, whoa. I didn't realize that was part of the gig, although I did somewhat. So I took that opportunity on. I told him that when my green card comes through, I'm going to want to leave. And he said, can you give me he said, how long is this going to take? And I said, a year. And I thought it would only be about 6 to 9 months. So I gave myself a buffer. And I said, I can commit for 9 months. And he said, okay, fine, we'll do the 9 months. So I assembled my team of trusty colleagues that I've worked with before. I had to do a business case, present it to the CFO, get some more millions of dollars. And it was interesting, this CFO was only really interested in kind of tangible dollar values. If you try and say, you've got 20-year-old computers, you need to replace them for productivity purposes, and you want to say that productivity is going to improve because the person could be more efficient, do more work, all those kinds of things. Some CFOs, they're not interested in that. The whole way that I sold this was actually on the fact that Windows XP was end of life. I think XP was end of life 2014. And so that was basically how I sold this project. So it was ultimately a cybersecurity compliance project because of the fact that it wasn't going to be secure. And I kind of played on the, if you get popped, this is going to happen, your business is going to go down, so when you kind of start talking about it from more of that perspective, I think that's a very powerful angle. And I've also had a lot of success in that at my time at Northrop, which we'll get onto that in a minute too. So secured some funding, went through, did a whole change and transformation piece. I had to fire a whole bunch of people, which I didn't have a problem with. So he didn't want to do that, but so I had to figure out who to keep and who was going to go. And part of that was I brought in a consultant to kind of help me with that. I worked with before to kind of figure out that. I had a list myself. He came up with basically the same list. And I was pretty straightforward, everybody. I've said, here's the direction we're going, and the train's going to leave the station, and you've got two choices. You've got to figure out whether you want to get on the train, right, and come on the journey, or whether you're going to stay behind. And if you stay behind, I can tell you how that's going to end, and it's not going to be good. And I was pretty straightforward, whatever analogy you want to use, but I was pretty transparent. Some people didn't want to come for the trip, so they left. That's how that worked. You know, they had all their servers were under people's desks and broom closets, and typical IT that I would say there's an underinvestment, but also, you know, more from the people leadership perspective. This company had started decades ago, and the people that were in charge back then were still in charge. It was kind of a mum and pop shop, I think they get called. They'd started as a very small business, and as it had grown, it had kind of just got away from them, and they weren't equipped, trained, prepared, you know, educated, whatever, hadn't taken guidance and counsel and advice to figure out how to evolve and grow with the company. So that's also, I think, a lesson learned too. They hadn't taken those steps themselves, and they basically become obsolete and ended up getting replaced. So we had to put everything into the data center, and it's a picture from the office. I mean, terrible place to work. Sydney Opera House, obviously, Harbour Bridge. While I was there, I rented an apartment across the, right across, so I could see the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House from where I was living for that 9 months. And I walked down to the ferry, and I took a ferry across to Circular Quay and up to my office, and that was a great 9 months. But needless to say, that was all successful, and a lot of good things worked out of that. Just an example of one of the sites, they did a lot of mining as well. This is iron ore up in the north of Western Australia. Interesting, some of the flights, basically everybody's wearing the high-vis yellow things. Everyone on the plane works there in some capacity. So I also took the opportunity to get out to as many sites as I could. So I think that was very enjoyable. I enjoyed that. My green card finally came through, and at the 9-month mark, I sat with the executive general manager of business services, and I said, "Hey, I'm leaving." And he was like, no, you can't leave. I want to hire you. And I said, I'm going to go. He put a blank bit of paper and a pen, pushed it across the desk at me, and he said, "Just write a figure down." You know, and I said, and he said, "Just write a figure." He goes, "Just put down whatever you want. I'll go and talk to the CFO, and we can probably make it happen." And I said, "I really appreciate that." And I said, if I didn't have something else lined up that I was going to try and do, you know, then, you know, because he said, "What are you going to do in the US?" And I said, "I don't know yet. I'm just going to go over there and I'll figure it out." Because I didn't have a job or anything organized. I just pushed a pen and a paper back, and I said, respectfully, I have to decline. And he kind of swore, and he said, on a personal level, he said, "I really respect that." He said, "It's awesome that you basically can't be bought." He said, "On a professional level, you're really pissing me off because I can't, you know, get what I want basically out of you. There's nothing else I can do but offer you, you know, you know, a lot of money." So, I mean, great to be in that position, but yeah, I just wanted to come to the US. So I came to the US, and my green card, just a real quick, I know this is not really a tech talk as such, but just a real quick deviation just to understand a little bit more about me. When I came to the US, my green card was one of the alien of extraordinary ability was the category that I met. You considered that exceptional, that you don't even need to have a job, you don't need to have anything. If you can qualify, then you just come to the country and you're good to go. So I did. And the validity is 10 years, and I had a master's degree, and I'd always wanted to be in the Air Force, even when I was a teenager. I tried. When I was in Australia, I kind of tried. Long story short, opportunity and timing didn't really line up. When I came to the US, I was 38 years old, went to the recruiter to commission, and you have to be a US citizen to commission. Obviously, with my green card, I wasn't a citizen, and I had to wait 5 years until I would be able to apply for citizenship. At that point, I'd be 43, probably too old to commission. So if you enlist, it expedites the citizenship process. So at 38, I enlisted. I went to boot camp at 2016 with a bunch of 17, 18-year-olds. And that was quite an experience. And half of them couldn't figure out why I was there. So within about 6 months of enlisting, I actually became a US citizen. So I'm very proud to serve in our country's Air Force. And I since commissioned. Now I'm a captain in an aeromedical evacuation squadron. So we fly around the world, we pick up people in need of medical attention, and we fly them to wherever they have to go to. So pretty cool mission. So it suits the way I like to work. I get on planes, we fly around the world, and we train, and we do missions, and great bunch of people, great mission. I love it. So This is fairly recently, just to give you some examples of things, just to let you know. So a slight deviation, but I know in my brief or my bio, my little talk, there was a piece about the US military and things, so just wanted to tie that in so you had an idea of how that kind of fits out. After I finished my initial training, I tried to get a job as an IT director in the US, something commensurate with, similar with positions I'd had before, but I wasn't successful. After 3 months, I was kind of trying to figure out why that was. A recruiter was fortunate enough to tell me that basically you're never going to get that kind of job because you're a foreign guy from a foreign country with foreign degrees, foreign experience, and you don't really have any credibility. No one knows who you are. So that's not going to work out, Like director level jobs, that's because somebody knows somebody and they already work in the company and that whole deal. So I thought, radio, I'm going to have to rewrite my resume and my LinkedIn and all that and kind of dumb it down a little bit to more of a commodity kind of IT technical resource to get a job. So I rewrote everything as a systems engineer and I put my resume out there. I had a call one day from a recruiter and they said, do you want to come and work at Northrop Grumman? And I said, sure. Are you the guys that do the B2? I didn't really know anything about Northrop Grumman too much at that point. And so I did. And that's only the second time I actually had to go for an interview in my entire life from all my jobs and things, right? As you heard through the history. So I went along for an interview, got hired, and they pretty quickly figured out I could do a lot more than what it was. So in my first 5 years, I got promoted 5 times within Northrop, and they've been pretty amazing to me. So I think that will then be a good segue into the Northrop piece. So I'm just checking on time. I'm happy to take as many questions as you want at the end, but we'll get into more of the Northrop piece and the technology piece. I promise we'll get to that too. This is not just a story of my life, but this sets the stage so you can see all the things that I've done. So when I came into Northrop and then I saw certain things, there was many recurring patterns and similarities from what I'd seen and done before. So I was able to apply a lot of knowledge and experience and things. So I'll talk about that as much as I can. But a real quick thing on Northrop, don't want to bore you too much. Northrop's a whole bunch of companies that have merged, acquisitions, bought, etc. over the years. So if you weren't aware how big Northrop is these days, pretty big, more than 40 billion a year. Northrop is, and they're all the companies. So I'm just going to kind of go through these slides. These are all the official public release slides. So I can talk about these. James Webb Telescope, I have a picture of that. Pretty awesome thing to be involved with too. 100,000 people across all 50 states. So pretty awesome company. I wanted to touch on our 4 values. We do the right thing. We do what we promise. We commit to shared success and we pioneer. So there are our company values. I think it's important. I've been extremely impressed with working at Northrop, and it's scary for me to say, but I could see that I could foreseeably work there until I retire, which is, for someone like me that has to move around every few years and do something different, that is a terrifying statement. But there are so many opportunities and sectors and roles and places to work and all that. You can basically have 10 different careers across a 20-year time frame if you wanted to in the same company when the company is that big and things like that. So these are some of the programs, projects, activities that we get up to. The picture on the top left is actually the F-35 production line. That's where I spent my first few years. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And then where I fit in a company here, I'm the CISO for effectively the aircraft kind of division, if you will, aeronautics. So B2 is obviously one of our platforms, B-21, world's first 6th-generation aircraft. We do a lot of work for Lockheed Martin on the F-35. We build the center fuselage. We've been doing some F-18 work with Boeing. We have a lot of global surveillance and autonomous aircraft. We have the E-2D we build, the Hawkeye. We have some kind of UAVs, if you will, Tridents and Global Hawks, etc. So there's a lot we do. There are the other sectors, space, a lot of rockets and satellites, missile defense, and advanced weapons are some of the other pieces that we have. So 30 million square feet of manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing at Northrop Grumman. When I first came to NG, I was working on the F-35 line, and it would be fair to say it was fairly similar to a lot of the construction projects that I worked at before, where a lot of things were segmented, a lot of things were separated. The business did not like IT. When I say the business, I'm talking about process engineers or manufacturing engineers, quality, that are on the shop floor. They didn't really want IT anywhere near any of their systems. And I understood why. they considered them to be multiple reasons. They considered them to be that critical and that important that they didn't want anybody to touch with it. So I get that. Secondly, they hadn't really had a good experience. If they had asked for help, it usually wasn't what they wanted. And so the way things used to get done, and I can talk about that a little bit because that's not the way we do it anymore, they would call the vendor would come out and fix it. That sometimes meant the PC dies, something as simple as a PC die. They would call the vendor would be in another state, put the PC under the arm, get on the airplane, fly over there. 3 days later, whatever piece of equipment it was back and running. So I would say a lot of scope for improvement. And without going into too much detail, I can't to provide too many specifics, but a lot of work done around integrating, everything. And this comes back to that technology piece, not really discriminating so much against the OT, but very much having a kind of a connect everything strategy. So that is the default position. I mean, there are use cases where it makes sense to have air gap systems. I get it. On a shop floor, I would disagree that that's probably not the best, maybe security posture or architecture, all things considered, because usually in these facilities, I'm not going to just pretend that it's just F-35. I've seen a lot of manufacturing facilities even outside of Northrop. They have extensive use of USBs. So you hear these things where a system is air gapped, but I never find that really to be true. I always find that there is some need to get data to the system or data from the system. Somebody always wants to get reports out of it, logging information. If it's doing some kind of quality measurements, they always want data out of it. And then there's inevitably some need to introduce a new program or a new update or something like that. So USB proliferation in manufacturing is usually prolific. There is usually extensive amounts of USBs. I'm aware of some facilities that have hundreds, and they try and keep track of it on Excel spreadsheets. So I can safely say we've basically done away with all of those, which is pretty remarkable for a manufacturing facility. And you can do that when you put everything on the network. Now, of course, it's a double-edged sword. There are inherent risks when you do that because maybe you're opening up the attack surface, you're increasing, the different threat vectors where somebody may be able to compromise a system, move, laterally across, et cetera. But you have to perform a risk assessment, and that's really a lot of the role, particularly of a CISO, but of, I think, cybersecurity leaders that you'll be, right? It's really about performing risk assessments. It's really what you're doing. I know you think technically it's you're hardening a system and you're doing things, but it's all to mitigate risks for the most part. And so it's really a key piece is to understand what's the less maybe of the two evils. Is it better to introduce some risks by having it on the network, or is it better to have it off and keep it separate? Certainly my approach, my strategy, my belief is that there are less risks. You have a better security posture if you connect everything and you put it on the network. So some people may not agree with me, and that's fine, but it's been a successful strategy for me to date. And so, like I said, or like the talk is titled, all about the technology piece, as far as that's concerned and the strategy of connecting everything, I think that's very, very true and applicable. So it makes sense to put all that on. While it's all about the technology in that regard, it is also about, I would say, some of the people and some of the other aspects. You're never going to be successful trying to do a change and transformation project or even kind of in place upgrades and things if you haven't got business support, executive buy-in, top cover, and support from the business. Because I've been involved in many project failures. I didn't talk about those because they weren't so much mine, but in the early 2000s, I was on a lot of projects as a technical resource, and projects failed. And I would sum that up mainly to poor project management. And that doesn't mean I'm singling out the project manager, but I would say poor stakeholder engagement, primarily with the executive and the business, and poor job communicating. You can't just focus on IT from a technology perspective. You won't be successful. You really have to focus on it more broadly and take a business approach and understand what's the business value, why would the business want to do this, what are the impacts, right, if something goes wrong, those kinds of things. So you really have to make sure that the business understands why and that the business really wants it. And I mentioned before, but I've had a lot of success on the compliance piece and the security posture. So I've successfully sought and been, secured tens of millions of dollars at funding through Northrop for a number of uplift, change and transformation programs. And we've been able to go through facilities like the F-35, that's effectively a 24-hour facility, and transition hundreds and hundreds of systems, away from vendor supported, maintained to NG supported standards. So we've created our own standards for manufacturing. I was able to drive all that myself and with the team to create standards not only for the sector, but also more broadly for the company. So we've had a lot of success in actually, I think, advancing a lot of our manufacturing perspective pieces. So yeah, let me just make sure I'm conscious I have a couple of minutes left. So let me just make sure I didn't miss anything here. Yeah, just while I'm checking my notes here, just the importance of, the relationships can't be misunderstated. I know I said that before, but when I was first on the F-35 line, my approach wasn't to go out there from an IT perspective. I went out there, I didn't do anything IT related for 6 months, right? And I don't think I'm going to get fired by saying that, but I just went out there to learn about aircraft manufacturing because I knew a lot about coal and mining and construction projects, but I didn't really know a lot about manufacturing. A lot of specifics are the same, but also a lot of things were different. So I really was just spent time out on the factory. I would come in at 5 in the morning sometimes when the technicians were there beforehand. I'd be there late at night because I do 24-hour shifts. I wanted to learn what happened and where and the importance of things. And when you do that, one, you build a great relationship with the business because they can see you really do believe, you really care, you're really there to learn, but also you get to understand, okay, this is critical because it would impact this. It's a choreographed move in an assembly line, production line, everything has to move. If there's something that's in station for too long, it causes a big backlog, and you're talking a lot of money when it comes to some of these kind of, air vehicles or structures that you're building. So I just think in general, if you're going to try and do any large-scale project, make sure you've got executive buy-in and support, make sure that you've got the appropriate funding. If you're not well funded, you're not going to succeed. And you need to make sure that you really understand what you're going to be tackling and changing. I think just one other comment, I think Jeff mentioned it yesterday about baking in security. I mean, absolutely, I completely agree with that. We work with our vendors up front before we even sign a PO for an equipment. We have standards that they have to meet to satisfy our requirements from a cybersecurity posture and a cyber compliance perspective before we're even going to sign a PO. So we have all those baked into the contracts. If there's an issue with the vendor, sometimes there is, well, the time to negotiate it and figure all that out is before you sign up to something. So we bake it in before we even sign a purchase order for automation equipment, quality tools, etc. So that's a key piece. When you have all the architecture, the infrastructure, the support mechanisms, the process, all the technology in place, and then the people to support it, when the equipment is coming in, when it's going through lifecycle management changes, you're able to, make sure that that's a key part of all of those changes and incorporated. And then just the last thing is, I had no idea that I was living in Palmdale for a while, working at the factory. I've lived in all kinds of places. I just want to reiterate that the importance or the value of taking opportunities in whatever form, they take will do you well. I've been fortunate at NG that I engage with a lot of the executive, the former CIO at Northrop Grumman. They have a high performance talent kind of program. And so I've been fortunate to interact with a lot of the senior leaders of the company. They said to me, "Are you comfortable moving around?" And I said, "Absolutely." And they've said, "You will have a very prosperous and successful career." And it was what I'd already learned from the opportunity I mentioned back in 1998 in New Zealand by going to Wellington. He said to me, "It's not necessarily the best person gets the job. It's the best person that's willing to move get the job. And you might be number 6 on the list, number 2 on the list, right? Because if there's a need and they need somebody, they're going to go down the list. And if you're the person that's willing to go to wherever it is, then you're going to get the job." So, I reference this because I believe you have to be out in the business, you have to be active, and you have to be in the forefront. I mean, that's really my role being a sector-facing, if you will, business leader. I have to be in the business. I can't be behind a desk in the back room doing things. It's not going to work, And so anybody I bring on the team, I have summer interns from students that are at high school, they're at college. We bring on people. Some of them, they don't want to go anywhere. They don't want to, I'm kind of, like you need to travel. The company will pay for it. It's not really a safety thing. It's actually just I don't want to travel. I'm good. I just want to be remote. Or I just want to, they're not really understanding, I think, the necessity in the role that we perform. We have functions, of course, where we have back of house teams that do cybersecurity and things like that. They're probably a great fit for that. But if they're coming to a sector-facing team, that's not going to be a good fit. So I just want to make sure that it's understood. It's a problem for people that have been in the industry for a long time too. You also get people that don't want to travel anywhere. But for me, that's a key piece of success. So I think that's all. I think I'm out of time. So I hope that was think we're at 5:20. I think it was all I had, so.
We've got time for a couple questions. Anybody? Joel, do you have, or? Okay,
I can hear you.
Their careers. Thanks. So just thank you for that. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed that.
I appreciate that. I hope so. That was the intent. So hopefully,
Yeah, well, it certainly,
mark in that
certainly
regard.
resonated with me. So thank you very much.
great.
I could ask you several questions, but I think the one that I'll ask you is about the standards that you talked about actually developing. You developed Northrop Grumman specific standards when you came in. I was curious, you know, what maybe the timeline was like doing that, and just if you could elaborate on what that process was like and any major obstacles or difficulties that you faced in doing so.
Sure, I appreciate it. It's a good question. I would say that has taken many years. It's a continual evolution, and that continues to evolve. I mean, in a large corporate, there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of restrictions. You know, I just found that IT was really focused on IT in the traditional sense. It was all about what worked in a corporate, what worked in an office, what worked in an enterprise. They didn't really have any manufacturing standards. So it was really defining what would a manufacturing, you know, maybe computer look like, right? But from a physical sense and logically, like, what kind of software would we put on that? What kind of software would we not put on that? And so if you want to have maybe a Windows image created, like at Northrop, you can't just say, well, I need a manufacturing image made, and then, you know, the client engineering team will make one. I had to write business case. So there needs to be at least several hundred you know, similar type machines that would qualify for a use case. So part of it was I had to do some business justification. I had to work with the previous CISO actually was incredibly supportive. So I was able to work with some people that were supportive of that, which was a key part. But it took time to drive, you know, standards. I mean, we have what we call command media, so it's official company policies. It took a while for that to kind of come together, where it basically said, this is our standards, this is how we're going to implement it, this is what we're going to do. But it is that people and process and technology piece. We didn't have any people that were there dedicated to support manufacturing IT. So we've actually grown a lot of the resourcing footprint as well as the, you know, our implementations have scaled. We've had to increase the, you know, the people footprint as well. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but a lot of roadblocks. I was always kind of bumping into the boundaries of, you know, the limits, if you could, of where I could go with things. But yeah, just by challenging some of that and pushing through with what you think is going to be a better outcome, I think is a worthy cause. Sorry, what was that? But yeah, wouldn't trust the relationships, exactly. Yeah, but not being afraid to challenge, not being afraid to try things. I knew what better looked like from where I've been. And there wasn't really anybody else that was kind of thinking like that. So that was an outside perspective. I was able to come in and just really drive that change. But thank you.
let me make one or two comments on
Please.
this, especially for the students. One of the things you should take away from this is you've probably spent time in a classroom and you've thought about what you're going to do for your career and you're going to write software. But the pictures that he had, the various offices, the various manufacturing sites, it isn't in an office. A lot of where your application is going to be out somewhere where things are being done. We talk about cyber physical. Well, that's really a kind of cyber physical environment.
Absolutely.
That's a first takeaway. So if you're thinking you're going to be comfortable just sitting in an office or working from home, there are jobs to do that, but that isn't where the real interesting opportunities are.
No.
I've had the opportunity to walk through that assembly plant. It is one of the largest enclosed spaces in the world. It is huge. And the amount of technology in there is amazing. You have opportunities if you're willing to do that. Second, oh, there's somebody else there with a question? Okay. Yeah, but a second thing that I'll just add on this. No, I'll go ahead. Well, let's go to the question. I'll come back to this. We'll make sure to get the question in.
All right, sorry for interrupting. Thank you for your speech, Michael. It's been a great opportunity listening to your career and how you got here. As a sophomore in cybersecurity, I feel like very overwhelmed with the opportunities around me, and I feel like I'm running out of time. But in reality, there's just so much more time for me. I really just should wait and be patient. I'm really curious about how your career was like since you didn't come from America and you worked in other places like Malaysia and the Philippines. I was wanting to ask you about a question about the globalization and working with people that don't speak like the same language as you, and how you were able to cross those borders to be able to make connections as like an IT systems engineer as well as a network engineer.
Yeah, it's a great question. I didn't really have time to delve into too much of all that, but part of the multinational global thing is all about the cultural sensitivity, right? There's so many different religions, so many different cultures and things. So it's fundamental as well, right? We talk about people process technology on the IT side, but you really have to understand the environment you're going to be working in all regards, right? So a lot of it was the cultural dynamics of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, not acceptable. I mean, fortunately, with the company, they would have some of the briefs because they know that if you're going to go there, so they will basically say, these are the things that you should do and you shouldn't do and all that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit of cultural awareness training, if you will. So some of that helps. But I mean, some of it, I would say, is common sense. It's about being, observing things. It's just about being humble. It's about seeing what, right? And if you do something that's maybe not quite appropriate, apologizing, recognizing it, and the party is understanding, because if you express that your intent is you're sincere and you're honest and you want to understand and you want to learn and you're seeking clarification and guidance and things like that, I always found that people were willing to say, well, this is not really how we do that here and this is how we do that there. So it's just I think seeking and having a desire to understand all of those aspects. I mean, that's why I focus mainly on the cultural one. I could probably talk about a whole bunch of things, but yeah, I think that piece is probably the most important. Does that help answer the question? Okay. Okay.
You're getting some good training with the multicultural aspects here we have at Purdue with people from all over the world, and take advantage of that. I'll tell you, from my world travel, the most important things to learn, other than where's a bathroom, are please and thank you and I'm sorry. If you can learn those in the local language, that will take you a long way. They'll recognize you don't speak the language, but the fact that you try to at least say that much makes a lot of difference.
Absolutely.
The other thing I was going to mention, the other thing to take away from this presentation is something that we don't convey well in classes, and that is scale. So you got a sense of that maybe by what's currently done at Northrop Grumman. If you're going to say you have to secure a lot of machines and you think, oh, that's 100 machines. Yeah, that's not even close. What would you say is just a ballpark number of things on the floor that you're
in the thousands easily?
Easily in
one, yeah, from an IT asset perspective. We have 100,000 users, so there's at least 100,000 computers.
Yeah.
So, and yeah.
Yeah,
So
in the thousands, and the companies that you work with are across multiple continents. So one of the things to think about as you go through your studies, and those of you who are doing research, and you're thinking about how to scale up what you're doing to apply it somewhere, don't think in terms of hundreds.
No.
Yeah, that's not going to be sufficient.
No, absolutely not.
But we have reached the end of the symposium, and I think this is a great capstone. Again, thank you so much. I believe you'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody actually wants to talk to you. He did mention he has internships, so that's something you might want to ask about as well. This brings us to the close of our symposium, and thank you all for staying with us for these 2 days. We will do this again next year. We don't have the date set. Most of this has been recorded and will be available through the website, so you can go back and study it a little bit more. I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to turn the mic over to our director for his final comments, and be safe with the weather out there.
So, yes, thanks again for your attendance. This is a great, another great symposium, and I hope that you will be able to share with us some of your feedback and suggestions on how we can improve our symposium for next year. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the symposium, we usually start the planning of the next one actually next week. Yeah, tomorrow. So yeah, so we will very much welcome any of your comments and suggestions. And thanks again for attending. And again, I would like to thank my CERIAS colleagues for making this possible. Thank you.